Hello and welcome to another one of my Creative Career Talks. My name is Andrew Macklin. I'm an actor and qualified career coach working with creatives throughout the arts, cultural and media sectors to further develop their work and careers. And today, on today's episode, I'm joined by script editor and development producer, Georgina Sherrington. Georgina, thank you for joining me on what is thankfully a chilly but fresh day. How are you doing?
Pretty good. Lockdown 2.
Lockdown 2. I know. Yeah, it's the main topic of conversation is what tier of lockdown people tend to be in these days, full or any of the other varieties. Just to give people, I guess, a brief introduction to yourself and to your work, and it's spanned over quite a few different areas. But you started out as an actor. You started out working famously as the character of Mildred Hubble in the children's series The Worst Witch from 1998 to 2001, and in the spin-off series Weird Sister College, The Adventures of the Worst Witch. And you also, you won the Young Artist Award for Best Performance in a TV Comedy Series, and the leading young actress for your work in The Worst Witch. And you are currently, having spent a couple of years working at the BBC, and then a little stint in the drama commissioning team there, you are now a script editor and development producer working on such shows as Harlots on Hulu. I'm sure I have missed out wonderful pieces of very valuable years of experience in there.
Yeah,
but
all sorts.
I hope I haven't invented anything.
No, that's all true.
Excellent, properly accurate. So I thought it would be really interesting because I guess I talked to quite a few people who would be moving from one industry to the other. And quite often that's seen as something that is either not particularly possible to do or very hard to do, or a wrong thing to do, I guess. There can be very rigid views around it. But just to begin, how did you end up getting that role so early on in that TV series? That seems such a pivotal thing.
I mean, I guess it was a mix of good fortune, because it was my first role and I was 12, and it's not like I think I looked like the girl in the books. But I had actually been auditioning for 5 years by the time I got the role. So I got nothing. And then I got one of two, and I didn't get it, for a student film, and I was so excited. And a month later, I got Mildred Hubble. So I'd been at a Saturday drama school, which I think was a way of my mum getting rid of us on a Saturday morning. And we had quite an eccentric headmistress who selected a few of her favourite students, and she used to do lots of the heavy lifting. She'd get us headshots, she'd put us up for roles, and essentially acted as our agent. And I was in that select group with my parents' permission. My parents were not stage parents; they were, it was basically as long as you can take us off to the audition. So huge good fortune. But I do remember, just before getting it, that I was thinking, I'm getting a bit old for this. I'm 12, the program stopped at 13. I've never got a part. I'm never going to get a part. So I was just beginning to get despondent when, wow. And it was, for me, it was something I'd wanted for years. And it was fantastic. It was great.
The idea of reaching despondency at 12.
At 12.
Now, being an Irish person, it's a show that I've not come across that much because there was different sort of Irish TV that we normally watch. But just to give, I guess, people who maybe haven't watched it a sense of the show itself, and in what way, because it was a massive deal. I mean, you were in America filming this, and it was quite a few
years ago. Yeah, it was a half Canadian production. And it's basically Harry Potter at a girls' school. So I was the Harry Potter of the girls' school. It came first, the set of books. It's a Jill Murphy set of children's books. But at the time, I think it was the highest funded children's show by quite a lot. I'm sure we've now been outstripped numerous times over, including by the new Worst Witch, or the remake of the show, which is fantastic, which Netflix have done. So it was quite a big budget performance, and it was a half Canadian funded production. So along with that, our headmistress was Canadian with an English accent, and we filmed 2 episodes in Montreal every year to sort of fulfill that funding requirement. So, the girls from Cackles Academy would go on a field trip, or we went to the Wizards School, I think, and it followed the books pretty closely, and then went on to new episodes, and it was just great. But it was an all girls. I went from an all girls actual school to this pretend all girls school. for witches. So there were sort of 6 or 7 of us that lived in each other's pockets every summer, and then we went away and we did our own growing up in the year back at our normal schools, and we'd come back every year, and it ran for 4 years. Then there was spin-off number 1, which was Weird Sister, which was another 4 months for me and a couple of the others. And then there was another spin-off called The New Worst Witch, which was my character's young cousin, I think. I should know this. And I was in that just for an episode to drop my young cousin off at school. So for 5 or 6 years, it was a pretty full-time fixture of my life.
God, I mean, it sounds like character-wise as well that it went on a full journey from you starting that school to leaving off the cousin in their new school.
I think I worked for Witch Civil Service by the end, via Cambridge University. So Weird Sister was at university.
So what was, I mean, and there's got to be so many to this, but what, on reflection, looking back, what was the best sort of experience on that? Looking back now, as a young person sort of developing, I guess, and learning, I mean, there must be so many learning points around being in a different country, having to work professionally, but also still growing up. So in hindsight, what was really uniquely good about that experience, learning-wise?
I mean, kind of everything. The novelty didn't die. I'd wanted to act for so long, and you arrive and you're surrounded by magic and potions and animals and other girls to go through it with. And yes, I think actually spending I was in most scenes, so I was on set a lot more than I think a normal child actor. Maybe not if you're Daniel Radcliffe and Harry Potter, but I was on set pretty constantly, which meant you are around adults pretty constantly. You do have to grow up quite quickly, and sometimes that was quite hard. I remember one day where I just really couldn't get something right, and feeling very embarrassed because it was a big crowd scene and everybody was waiting on me, and the first AD was quite annoyed because I wasn't getting it right. But then there were huge benefits from that. I got to meet so many different people, and I'm not from an acting family. It's not like we knew the world, so everything just seemed fantastic, really. What's it like to be a gaffer? And we had a great director and a DOP, a couple of directors actually, but the DOP Colin had used to I think he basically worked out that I'd be a pain in the neck if he didn't keep me occupied. So he used to explain the shots he was doing, and he'd explain why we were using the lighting we were using, which made waiting around while they lit around you a lot more fun. So it was all great. And then actually just in terms of balancing social life and schoolwork, I think I learned a lot from that too. I used to miss a term of school every year, and so you learn to work independently because you've got to still pass your exams when you get back. So I loved it.
I think there's something really unique about, I think, TV and theatre specifically, in that it's one of those few truly intergenerational working environments. Yeah. You are working with people, and they're messing up like you're messing up, who are in their 60s or 20s or 30s. So there's a real broad, I think, way of learning there. And just, I mean, even doing very small amounts of TV and here and there, I still, as an adult, find it quite stressful and hard work. And so, I mean, what were those challenges for you looking back now that you sort of had to face? Because, you know, it's high production, a lot of time and effort, like you were saying. And I guess as a capacity as a young person, there's a lot of pressure, presumably. What were those challenges like?
I mean, it was such a supportive environment. So in the whole, it was just really great. I was quite a few years younger than the other cast, actually. So the other, there were 6 or 7 of us on set all the time. We were great friends. They're still like sisters today, many of them. We're all still in touch. But, starting out, I was 12 and very innocent for 12. I mean, I'd never kissed a boy. I'd never had a boyfriend. I went to this sheltered private school and I was a little bit of a swot. And I was working with 16, 17-year-olds who were out clubbing at the weekend, and I think that's probably harder for them than it was for me, because I was the young one. But I think learning to grow up pretty quickly and learning, that consistency. You're on set for 10 hours a day. You are actually paid to be there. You do have to. Doesn't matter whether you've had a little bit of a fight with one of the girls. Not that we fought that much, or that you are missing your friends at school. I remember missing a school dance at a local boys' school, and and being so upset that I was going to be late for this school dance. And of course, you know, to the working adults around me, it just didn't matter that I was going to be half an hour late to a dance. So you did just have to grow up pretty quickly, but I loved it so much that I wouldn't have changed it.
It sounds like it was a particularly supportive environment.
Yeah.
They must have done a really good job of going, look, we've got a young cast and we really need to.
Yeah, they were really good. They were.
And so to jump forward a little bit then, because I can imagine that must have been a massive experience. And so where was the sort of turning point? Presumably that then came to an end to a degree, and there was presumably, you know, a fork in the road. So that comes to an end, and then there's new ways of
and I think,
yeah.
I mean, I don't know how life would have turned out differently, but I think almost, I don't, you know, I do believe in regrets, but not the small stuff. But I think when you're 16, it's very easy to see things through one lens. And I think so by the time for me it came to an end, I was 16, 17 and my A-levels were coming and I had to get into university. And so actually coming up back of the series, which did come to a natural end, Weird Sister didn't get recommissioned, as I remember. And I probably should have been going full pelt at film roles or anything else to get more experience acting. I knew I wanted to be an actress, but my A-levels seemed so important and so big that I didn't want to. I didn't want to miss any more school. So I sort of came to a halt for a couple of years through choice, to study, which now looking back at it, what on earth was I thinking? I probably would have been fine anyway. I could have taken them a year later, but you don't think like that when you're 16. And I had a fantastic 2 years at sixth form, not being normal again, because I was always normal during the year, but just being a teenager, having my first boyfriend, you know, hanging out with friends, doing the school play. I never got to do the school play because I was always away filming. So I got to do the school plays finally, and I loved it. And then I made the decision to use my Westwich earnings to go and study in America. Mm-hmm. So again, professionally, I was out of the game for another 4 years. Mm-hmm. So I took a fairly big break from it. Mm-hmm. Not really consciously thinking I won't act for 6 years, but really wanting to do school and university. And again, loving doing university plays with my peer group because I hadn't had a chance to do as much of that growing up. So I guess that's sort of how it came to an end. And I think, I mean, I can carry on. I then moved to LA for a year because I'd studied in America, so I had a year's visa. And I thought, well, what else would you do with a year in the US if you want to be an actress? Don't ever move to LA when you don't know anyone and you're 23. It was awful. It was really, really the worst year, I think, of my still relatively young life. It was horrendous.
I mean, it does sound like that it was probably very useful to have a period of not working after working so long on the show, yeah. And then to be, like you said, a 17-year-old out dating, and then to have time at university as well, and not being so professionally sort of, you know, I guess, stringent. And then LA, and I think it's a very common story. I think people going to LA and finding it potentially traumatic. I think it's a very common actor story. And if you don't, I mean, what were the elements that were, very briefly, the ones that were, I guess, surprising and difficult out there? Because I think it can.
Oh, I don't think I had a clue what I was in for, really. And I think it's part and parcel. I'd had this very rose-tinted introduction into acting. I think whereas in America you've got your agent and your manager. In England, you've just got the one. And when you're a children's agent, I mean, children's agents here are fantastic. You know, my agent used to take me out for lunch. We used to chat on the phone if I was thinking about getting my hair cut. They're very much a holistic part of your life. I remember my agent in LA, who I found fairly easily. I was very lucky there. But after a couple of months of me suggesting that we got coffee, he finally came and met me on a Saturday morning and said, "Is something that," I think he thought I was really in trouble, that something might be happening, whereas to me it was totally normal that I would have an ongoing relationship. So I think I just didn't know. And I'd had this wonderful group of friends at university. We'd done a lot of theatre together, we'd collaborated, but not many of us actually. A lot now live in LA, but for that first year out of university, not many people were perhaps foolish enough hop on over to the West Coast. So there weren't many people that I think I knew 3 people in the city when I arrived, and it rose to a grand total of about 10 by the time I left. And it just wasn't. Whereas in London, I knew most of the casting directors, I knew my agents, I'd met, I had other friends doing the same job. I think it was that lack of community. And it's a little bit of there's about 10 times more work going on, but a lot of it is not as good as here. Whereas here, I think if you get an audition, you've already been whittled down from a pile of 100 to, I mean, you would know this better than me, but to about 30, 60. So you've got a much better chance of getting the job. And the caliber of work, I think there's less of it. But overall, it's generally better. So I think I just struggled to sort of find a niche. And maybe if I'd stuck at it, I would have done. But after 11 months, I was miserable. And I couldn't audition anymore because my visa would have run out by the time I got home, or by the time I did the filming. So off I came home.
I mean, you say, foolish enough to move out to LA, but I mean, I think it's really admirable, the idea of moving to a place that is the center of that I think your sense of being really busy and intense without knowing anyone. I think anyone in my mind that does that, irrespective of the experience, is someone who's, really putting themselves out there. I think so. Yeah, I'm sure. I think for a lot of actors, there is that sense of what was I doing, and I think what you reflect there is quite true around the sense of, in the UK or on this side of the pond at least, there is less work, but the quality does seem to be higher, and it's a smaller pool to a degree. So there's a bit.
Just find your community. The casting directors know you, whereas I think that would have taken years in LA just because there's so many of them.
So I'm curious then, it sounded like there was a visa coming to an end, which might have prompted a bit of a shift. And I guess everyone's sort of career is marked with these sort of in-between spaces. So a period of doing a thing, and then a period of not necessarily knowing what comes next, and then a period of doing a thing again. So what was that experience for you when you were coming back? What was the space in between what you then next chose to do?
I think it was a fairly, perhaps not the most direction-filled period of my life. I came back. All of my university friends were in America, so luckily for me, I have very close school friends, as you know, that's how we know each other. So I was reconnecting with friends and went back to my old agent, which I think in hindsight, Galloway's is a brilliant agency, but probably wasn't the right thing to do because they'd known me as a child actor. So I was still going up for very roles playing a lot younger. I had, through a friend, worked for a producer in LA and really enjoyed it and enjoyed seeing their world. I had produced quite a lot of theatre at university, so I had this idea I might want to produce. So I did some work for the British Shakespeare Company, unpaid, and I did some work for a film producer, also unpaid, but that I loved. We rewrote a script that she'd optioned with the writer. She was also a bondswoman, so I would help her look at the budgets and look at the scripts, and I got a taste for that. But I was still very committed to this path of being an actor. And I think at the time, I was terrified that if I told people I was anything other than an actor, then or that if I wanted to go and work at a production house, and I said I was an actor, they'd think that I'd just run away the minute a part came up, which might have been true at the time, and that I couldn't do it unless I was just 100% an actor. I wouldn't succeed. And I think that was the wrong. I was only 23. I think that was the wrong impression, because actually I think, I'd loved working for these 2 producers. I knew I loved that. I knew I wanted to produce, but I didn't dare go and do it in case people didn't think I was an actor anymore, or in case the producers laughed at me and said, we don't hire actors. And actually, of course they do. Of course people cross over all the time. A lot of the most successful television writers are also actors. But when you're 23 and people say you've got to have that single-minded focus, it's very easy, I think, to get worried about what you should and shouldn't do. And I don't know, I get the impression, I've got younger brothers, and I used to teach or tutor to make money on the side of acting and not earning a living. And I get the impression the generation behind us are not as restricted as that, but I certainly felt very boxed in. So I had a couple of years of kind of wanting to act and not acting enough, and getting very frustrated, very, very frustrated. And watching my friends beginning to kind of get promotions at work, and definitely learning and growing more than anything. And I think I'd had such a privileged and lucky introduction to the world of acting that even when I got a job, if it was 2 days on an independent film, or I didn't learn as much as maybe someone else coming out of drama school, because I've been on a film set before. And I found myself, I had a really good year about 3 or 4 years later, where I was the lead in a wonderful film called Stop Eject, where the director was brilliant, and his previous kind of film would star Benedict Cumberbatch before Benedict Cumberbatch was Benedict Cumberbatch. So it was a lovely experience with a great team. And I had another couple of kind of quite well paid parts. And I thought, oh, things are beginning to happen. You know, it's taken me 4 years to get back in there, but it's beginning. And then I tallied up the number of days I've been acting that year. 9. And I thought, you know, at this rate, I'm not going to get anywhere. And maybe that's the way I'm driven, because I know that acting just takes persistence and rejection. But I basically enjoy the acting bit, and I don't really enjoy anything else. I hate headshot. I hate auditioning. I really don't like emailing people and asking them for work. Whereas I know some people who really enjoy the hustle, and they're very happy actors, but they're the only happy actors I know. I think. So a switch went off, and I just thought, right, no more.
Sorry to interrupt. Just really briefly, before we get back to this switch, it just occurred to me, I mean, you were mentioning about that 23-year-old version of yourself that was, I can't be an actor and work for this producer, and also I'm trapped in the same way with my identity the other way around, being an actor who's working a bit for a producer. And I wonder, looking back, if you were to talk to 23-year-old version of you, what would you say, or what advice would you give to just help them calm a little bit? Because it feels a little bit like that version of you is a little trapped between I have to do one or have to do the other. What should that be in your mind?
So I had a directing professor at university, Tim Basson, who very sadly passed away too young. And he gave me some advice when I was leaving, which was write. Because if you write, you will produce. And if you produce, you can then act. You can do whatever you want. But until you write, you won't. And I think that is for solid advice. I wish I had taken it on board. And I think I looked at it and thought, oh, well, in America, maybe that's true. But in the UK, people don't want actor writers. They'll just think I'm, you know, again, I you know, unless I'm 100% an actor, they won't take me seriously. And that was really silly. I think writing, and I've come back round now to development. So I still don't write, but I work with writers. And then I think the second one, which I now tell people, and I used to hate hearing it, is it doesn't matter where you start. It just matters that you start. And I think I spent those, you know, even though I'd had a great start beforehand, I think I spent a few years when I was first back in England kind of not starting, because I was too nervous to go and work for, you know, after the producer I had been working with had gone back to America, I was too nervous to go and seek another producing job. I was too nervous, not nervous, but I just thought it would be the end of all acting. Which was ridiculous, because I wasn't acting enough to earn money. So I was doing all kinds of things to earn money, like temping, tutoring, lots of tutoring. I worked for a guy that ran 5 businesses as his kind of, I guess, executive assistant. And I was using all of my time that I could have bbeen producing doing those things because they earned money. And I think because I understood that I could drop them for a part. Whereas if it was producing, it would be important. So I could, you know, how would I make that choice? But that would be a good choice to have. In hindsight.
That's a good reflection to have, that, you know, because we're often to that struggle of, well, if I'm committed to one, but that's a good conundrum to have a little bit. And I'm thinking, or going back to what you're talking about, that switch, and I could definitely relate to that idea of, you know, there's definitely been years I've had as an actor where it might look like I've been in 2 or 3 things, but in reality I've filmed for 7 days over the course of the year. So I can completely, that resonates with me, that sense of, am I an actor only doing, who knows? And so you're mentioning that switch, that sense of, oh yeah, something needs to change now, needs to go in a different direction. And so, yeah, what was that next direction? Because I know you ended up doing some work, you worked for a couple of years at the BBC, and obviously you're in script editing and development now. So what was that next step after you flipped that switch and said, yeah, I'm...
So I had tried one switch already, which was vocal coaching. Actually, I got down to final interviews to work with Giles Block, who was the head of education at the Globe, on a voice traineeship, and that didn't work out. That to me was like acting, and interestingly, they didn't give me the job because they thought I really just wanted to be an actor, which was true. So they were right. But so I think by the time I reached this switch, I don't know. I'd had a friend visit from university who I'd done a lot of theatre with. I directed a lot of theatre with, who is fantastic, who I'm very close to. She had become a management consultant, and she was from a family of teachers. She specialised in educational consultancy because she wanted to affect more than just a class or a school of students. She wanted to affect educational policy, and she still works in that field and does brilliantly. And she was loving her job. And she said, Georgie, it's great. You know, you get to think on your feet. You get to talk with clients. Why don't you read this book about it? And the book was The McKinsey Way, which is a series of, I don't know, you know, if you know management consulting, they go in, they help businesses with problems that the businesses can't solve themselves. So whether that's we're going to go bankrupt in 6 months, or whether that's we're thinking of merging and we can't get any of our own people to work on this because we can't tell them that we're thinking of merging. So they do really interesting things. She gave me this book. It was like a series of detective projects, only intellectual ones, because they were, you know, here's British Airways and I forget the stories, but you know, here's home base, it's going to go bankrupt, what do you do? And so you'd read them and they were fantastic. They were like drama stories. And I thought, well, who wouldn't like this? And you get to solve really interesting problems. And I think part of, and I'm sure you can relate, sometimes as an actor, if you're not working as much as you want to be, or if you're working on things that maybe aren't your ideal, what was frustrating me the most, I think, was watching my friends learning so much from their jobs and feeling like I wasn't learning. So I just thought, right, well, this is what Jackie likes it. I really like this book. So I read everything. And I, you know, within 6 months, again, very lucky, I'd been teaching the GMAT, which is what you take to go to business school, as well as SATs. So I had been doing a lot of numerical work, again, on the side to make money, but with some of those skills. So I trained pretty hard for 6 months and really had a kind of uphill struggle convincing a management consultancy company that an actress did want to be a management consultant and could do it and wasn't just trying it out, you know. So I had to take it quite seriously. And it was it was a fascinating 6 months. I got the job. I worked at the Boston Consulting Group for a year. I made some fantastic friends. I learned tons. Absolutely hated it. I cannot imagine a job I'm less suited to. Just it was a lot of spreadsheets and, you know, and really smart people, but really smart computer scientists or data analysts or a lot of scientists. And you know, credit to my partner still does the job. It's a fantastic job. It really is. It's really interesting. It pays really well. It's really collegiate. So I had all of that isolation I've been feeling as an actor answered. So it did a lot of what I wanted. But I was not temperamentally suited to spreadsheets. I'm not a particularly conscientious, detailed focus, numerical thinker. And I do tend to get passionate about ideas, whereas it's a management consultant's job to be really neutral and present the options. So that was, but again, one of the best years, you know, one of the years where I learnt the most was that year. And I went from there to the BBC. Initially out of strategy, I went into production because I thought, oh gosh, strategy is really not for me. But actually elements of strategy are for me. You do get to think through some really interesting problems, and the BBC has a fantastic strategy team. So I did a year with BBC Comedy just as a sort of business advisor to the two heads of BBC Comedy on the beginning of commercializing studios, on the fact that BBC Three was going online, really interesting stuff, and got to see a little bit of how a big production house functioned for the first time. And then I went into the BBC strategy team and did what's called content strategy, which is kind of, here's our charter settlement, what should we commission over the next 5 years? You know, we need to do some more drama because it's doing so well. We need to do some arts that either reaches underserved audiences, or we need to focus our arts on our core audience and then do some entertainment that will reach underserved audiences. So really, really interesting stuff. Still not for me. I basically liked the job because I got to hang out with the producers and the commissioners and get to, you know, spend time with these brilliant people doing really cool jobs. So after about 3 years, maybe 3.5 years of that, I think I finally was no longer an actress, and so could think of myself as a producer, and decided I needed to take the leap. And I'd been reading for lots of drama companies, including BBC Drama and BBC Drama Commissioning, through those 3 years, because I did know that I definitely wanted to work with drama and work with scripts. And the BBC commissioning team, who I'd been working with as a strategist, were shorthanded. They had Piers Winger was just coming in, Polly had just left, so they were missing a head, and they were missing, I think, several regional people, and they had a huge backlog to get through before studios commercialised. So I just came in as a totally junior. I made no decisions. Very few people do in commissioning. It all funnels up. But I just read scripts for 6 months and reported up to the commissioners on what I thought they should have a read of, and nothing I read in the 6 months got commissioned, which I think is totally normal. But for me, it was fantastic because, one, I suddenly found something I really enjoyed again. Mm-hmm. And two, it gave me that exposure that I perhaps had been missing by not going and working at a production house like I'd wanted to for years.
So just to retrace the steps a little bit there, I mean, I could hear that a little, I guess, trend of, in going to the management consultancy, this sense of wanting to satisfy a need for education. So, yes. You know, I think a lot of actors have that, a very hungry intellect.
Yes.
It isn't being fed. There's a real sense of, I need to go somewhere with this. And also the sense that consultancy work was solving problems. And I think that's tying in with, I think, something of the actor and of actors in general around this sense of, I want to know how people and situations work in the greater scheme of things. So although it was ticking some boxes, it was not ticking all. And I'm curious around then, because presumably you could have went on the next step after that management consultancy job to almost any institution, presumably. And I found it interesting to hear you mentioned it was to the BBC. Was there any kind of longer game at play in your mind? Was it a sense of, I just want, tell me a bit about that.
What was part of what, so yes, my friend Jackie enjoyed management consultancy. That was one of the reasons I thought I might enjoy management consultancy. The other reason was that it gives you very, very good career options afterwards, because you develop all of these skills, both of dealing with the clients, solving the problems, dealing with the numbers. And I did know that television felt like this. You know, I'd always wanted to work in television, even when I I never wanted to win an Oscar. I wanted to be in the bill. That was always my goal as an actor, was to do long running, you know, a bit like The Worst Witch, something where you get to keep the same part year after year. And so it had always been television for me, not film. It had always been, British content, that idea. And I think you could really, anyone looking at it at the time could see this big shift where suddenly it was becoming a lot more, not American, but a lot more businesslike. There was a lot more money at stake. The budgets were suddenly going up. And so I did think, I could do a few years at BCG. BCG had the largest media practice of the big three management consultancies as well. There's 3 or 4 of them that people go to. And BCG is one of the ones known for media. And so unfortunately for me, it was not a year where they were doing a huge amount of media work that particular year. But that was my thinking, was this is my first choice because they'll do media work. I'll work in the media practice, then I'll go to a media company, and BBC was top of the list. So there was definitely that plan. And I think I could have been very happy if I stayed on the business side. It's not that I don't enjoy the business side of media, and some of my mentors and bosses that I worked with and respected the most are on the business side. But at the same time, I'm an ex-actor and I love scripts, and I was a lit grad, and I'm hoping eventually at some point way down the line to be able to do that dual, you know, a role where I'm senior enough that you do have creative oversight of a slate.
What would you say to someone who wants to either pivot into TV or pivoting in general? What are those things that kind of allow you to be able to see yourself differently in order to make those shifts? Or is it a case of just jumping in and allowing it to happen to you? What's your sense?
No, I don't think it is, because I think, you know, even when I left the Boston Consulting Group and went to BBC Comedy, where I was doing this businessy role, but suddenly I was around production people, my emails were too formal compared to everybody else's emails. My dress sense was corporate because I had a load of work clothes, and everyone else, you know, you could come into BBC Comedy in your pajamas at the time if you were doing some radio, you know? And so I really think I'm quite a big believer, not in faking it till you make it, let's say, but in kind of walking the walk a bit. And so actually a huge part of my job hunt over the 3 years I was at the BBC trying to get into drama was reading Broadcast Magazine and literally writing down names, you know, who is Beth Ann Jones, who now I know very well and could go for a coffee with and produce The Night Manager. But who is, you know, who are the companies that I need to know the name of? How do people dress? How do people talk? I actually think you really consciously have to adopt that stuff. And it took me, I was at BCG for a year, and about 7-8 months in, there was a girl I really admired who presented herself really well. And I started dressing like her. Not in a creepy way, just a bit smarter. And I stopped referring to myself as an actress. Certainly, I mean, I've been told not to do that in front of clients, but and it did make a difference. It made a difference in feeling at home there and in presenting myself there. I think the same was true for the BBC. So I think you kind of have to consciously, you know, if you want to be a presenter, and you're not a presenter, you need to know who the top 100 presenters are, who the top factual companies are that are hiring presenters, what they've got commissioned, what the kind of cycle of a project is. I think all of that stuff you can kind of study. And I definitely did that while I was in the strategy team. You know, I read every screenwriting book under the sun. I took courses. I got to know literally just the names, who's producing what, who was involved with what, who were the writers. And it felt sometimes totally aimless because there was no deadline. I wasn't delivering work to anyone, and it was quite a lot of work. But at the same time, it meant that you felt in that world, and it did. I think it's essential.
I mean, that I think sounds so key to, I think, any position, any job. This walking the walk, and what it sounds like it allowed you to do was feel like you were in that role. That gave you then a confidence to go, I am this thing now. I've spent so much time, I guess, acclimatizing to an industry that you are moving into without being in it yet, which is, I think, exciting because it allows you to start that process no matter where you are.
And I think as well, talking to people. I mean, I went, but before leaving BCG to go to the BBC, I had 18 coffees with people who work in media, and it was the 18th where, thankfully for me, they needed somebody to start pretty closely. But even if I hadn't got the job, it did mean I had spoken to 18 people about what it was like. And when I knew I was leaving the BBC to go to an indie, I actually spoke to everybody who'd worked in an indie who I had worked with as a strategist. You know, they really kindly had coffees with me and said, okay, this is going to be the size of a drama slate. If it's bigger than this, this is the problem. You know, just things that they'd learned. And I think that's super useful, especially if you're transitioning, just to get a feel for. And I did the same with the management consultancy as well. I had spoken to a lot of management consultants by the time I walked into the interviews, so that I wasn't just an actress who wanted to be a management consultant. I did have an idea. Didn't quite understand how much Excel would be involved, but I did have an idea of what the job entailed, what the hours were, what to expect.
But that's so key, and it's so human as well. And I think it speaks to those skills that you would have as an actor, that idea of going, how do I really get under the skin? How to really find out what that world is like? Not in a weird way of dressing like somebody else doing it, but in a way of just expanding your knowledge about an industry more than just reading what a particular job brief might be, but really understanding what it is to live in that world, I guess.
And it's interesting, when the first indie I went to was actually another career mistake, but a very small startup, which was maybe not the best plan. I maybe should have gone to one of the more established ones in a more junior role. But I worked with an amazing woman who had built and run her own factual company. And we were basically a 3-person team. She was one of the team. And I watched her work, and what she was brilliant at doing is, if we needed a budget for a production and it was out of our experience level, which it often was because there were 3 of us, she'd call someone. And I still do that. You know, I needed to do a writing schedule the other day, and I'd done a version and I think it was sensible, but I wasn't sure. So I just called a couple of friends of mine who also script edit, and they didn't mind at all. And they sent me examples of theirs, and it was a nice chance to catch up with them. And I don't think I would have done that before having to go through those transitions and realizing how valuable it can be to call on people and how little people mind.
I mean, what's coming across, I think, a little bit for me is that these sort of, to use your own term, career mistakes
Yes.
I've heard over the course of years actually had like real gems in there,
Yeah,
whether the management consultancy with the kind of variety of skills. Would have had-
that's
we,
the management
we
consultant.
usually have a pet that comes into one of the interviews at some point. This is the first. This is the first
It might
other
be
management
the
consultant.
Jeremy.
But yeah, it seems like there's a gem in all of those little.
Sorry.
But it seems like there was a gem in all of these mistakes as
Yeah.
time has gone on. And I'm interested then, I guess, because there'll be a lot of people who'll be interested, I suppose, in your specific role now, having gone on this journey. And what was, yeah, what is walking the walk? So if someone's looking to, I guess,
Yeah.
into drama development or script editing, yeah, what I know you've spoke a little bit around, you know, find those 100 names of people who are producing,
Yeah.
get into the world in that way. What else would you advise?
I mean, there was another persistent piece of advice that I'd heard since I was 23 and asking, because another reason I went to management consultancy instead of drama at the time was that when I spoke to people about how to go to drama, they said there is only one way. You've got to start at the bottom. You've got to learn your ropes. It doesn't matter whether you're 50, you know, you need to go and be an assistant script editor. And my boss's wife had gone from head of comms at the BBC to being an assistant script editor. And I think at the time, because so much of my frustration with acting was coming from a lack of learning, from being in a place where I didn't feel like I was challenged or learning, I couldn't make myself take that advice. I couldn't go and sit at a reception desk at a production house. Actually, I think it's very good advice. It absolutely is how drama works, both from a scripting perspective and a production perspective, because once the production starts going, they really don't have time to explain stuff. So I ended up going and being an assistant. So I did the startup for a year that the funding got pulled from, learned loads, worked with this brilliant woman and another brilliant colleague, had an amazing time, got to use a mix of business and creative stuff. So everything I wanted from a job, but the funding got pulled and it was a small startup, and a lot of drama startups don't succeed. So after that, I thought, right, I have got to start listening to the advice I'm getting rather than just asking for it. So I went and I was an assistant script editor on Harlots. So I was the most junior person in the room at all times. I made a lot of cups of tea. Everybody made tea, and it was a lovely place. And I think I learned so much from doing that. And I wasn't immediately good at everything because I hadn't seen the process before, in the way that if I'd started as a receptionist at a production house, been an assistant, moved on to an assistant script editor role, as is the normal path, I would have seen stuff coming a mile off that I hadn't experienced before. So I do think, as frustrating as it is, that is good advice, and that you don't have to do it for long. You know, I did Harlots for 6 months and then I was straight on to other script editing roles, and now I'm a development executive at a Nordic studio where I'm getting to do a mix of business and creative, and I feel like I've got that experience solidly under my belt from having done the junior stuff. So I think, annoyingly, it was really good advice.
I think that's really reassuring, I think, for people to hear, because the expectation often is, well, if I have to pivot to something else, I can't take the dropping down to spend years doing something, like you say, that isn't as intellectually, you know, gripping. And to hear that actually that process is A, quite necessary to understand that world, and B, can shift significantly quicker than you might expect.
Yes. And I do think I mean, certainly in drama, but I'm sure it's true of factual in the other genres, people move very quickly. They really do. But getting that first intro role, however you can get it, I do think I learned so much from it, even having done it after drama commissioning, after working as a development executive for a year at an indie. I learned more going and being an assistant for 6 months, and had a blast and got to see something on screen that I'd made, and that we'd made. So I do think that is worth it. And then in terms of how else, I mean, for specifically people looking to get into development, I think script reading is massive. And script reading for production companies is a really useful way to get to know people. You know, it pays something like 50 quid a script. So not very much, because it takes hours. You've got to read the script of a novel, and then you've got to write up a report on it for the company. But it's a great way to begin to get to know producers, begin to get to know the types of material that they're looking at. And I still, okay, this is a bit like when I say I exercise every day. I don't. but I still think I should be reading a script a day, and I mostly do, so that you are keeping across what a good script looks like, what a bad script looks like, and what's out there, who's out there.
Thank you. That's so useful, because it really gives a clear sense of the craft behind
Yeah.
of really the knowledge of how things work narratively and what is good writing, to have that, I guess, sharp and ready. Georgina Sherrington, thank you so much. I think the information has been priceless. Some of the practical tips around looking at how to look at those things. And then also, I think just it's been so useful just to hear your story, where you've come from and how you've managed those shifts and changes, and where it's ultimately left you, which is, I think, somewhere that's, you know, really kind of integrated. All the different skills and things have sort of come together in a way. So thank you so much for your time, and to your dog and to your management consultant.
Thanks, Andrew.